I can't help but feel like Brittany Renner is the embodiment of when we're told how we should live our lives, only to be led astray and told correctly later on in life after the damage has already been done.
I hate how I allowed myself to just be like used up by men. That came from a lack of self-worth. I did not understand my value that I was born with. When I think about my list, it's repulsive because they didn't deserve it. Yeah, I would absolutely change sexually how I move around.
Hey y'all, it's your girl Tynesha Renee here. Welcome back or welcome to my channel if you're visiting for the first time. This is Tynesha Talks, where I like to speak my mind and I love when y'all speak back. I typically try to stay away from celebrity gossip on my channel, but today we gotta talk about Miss Brittany Renner. Brittany's entire existence parallels conversations that we've had on my channel, specifically when it comes to insecurities that women have about their sexual past and the societal stigma against women who are a bit more liberated, promiscuous in their 304 phase, as some of you would say. But before we get into the tea today, honey, I want to give you guys a little bit more context on who Brittany Renner is. Brittany Renner is a 30, soon to be 31-year-old content creator, influencer, and entrepreneur, but she's mostly known for her sexual past, specifically when it comes to dealing with athletes and other men who are in the entertainment industry. To be completely honest, this is not uncommon at all, but Brittany made a name for herself when she began to promote the lifestyle of using athletes for their resources in exchange for sexual favors.
The worst people to deal with are the athletes. None of them use condoms, really. So if y'all really want to try to come up off a check off a man, you could just fuck an athlete. They're really done.
Yeah. Ever since she's been getting a lot of backlash from the media, I have personally noticed that she has been doing a lot of work to rebrand herself. It has been referenced by other creators as the Brittany Renner Damage Control Tour, where she's trying to show you a different side of her. Some people question if she's authentic or not, in hopes of salvaging her reputation. Now that you guys have a little bit more background on who Brittany is and why she causes so much controversy, let's go ahead and get into it. First and foremost, I do commend Brittany for her transparency. I'm not here today to tear Brittany Renner down or bash her in any kind of way, but as always, I'm gonna keep it real with you guys. It is hard to get in front of people and talk about your past if you're not the most proud of it, or just share things that people may and likely will judge you on. It's very easy for millions of people to point the finger when they're sitting behind a screen and their dirty laundry isn't aired out for the world to see. And speaking of that, I want to talk about the pushback that Brittany has been getting, specifically from men who devalue her based on her sexual past. As the late and great Bob Marley once said, don't point fingers unless your hands are clean. Now, if you're new to the channel, I just want to say that I do not identify as a feminist. This idea of sexual liberation, sleeping around in the same ways that men do, those are things that are not beneficial to women. I actually don't condone anyone sleeping around with a whole bunch of people, but that's just me. With that in mind, I do take issue with men who criticize women whose track record isn't completely spotless, knowing good and well that they move in similar ways, if not worse, than the women that they are criticizing. I know that some of you are probably already fixing your thumbs to say,
while men and women are not equal, women are supposed to value themselves. They are the prize. You should not be easily accessible.
I am a person who expects men to hold themselves to the same standards that they are expecting of women. Just a little bit of a sidebar, I think that a major issue in society is that women aren't doing well enough at holding men to higher standards. Therefore, they don't feel a need to change, but still continue to enforce these standards in women because they can. Gender norms and double standards do not negate hypocrisy. It doesn't change the fact that you did something just because it might be more socially acceptable for you to do it versus someone else. In other words, if we're saying that it says something about your character to sleep around with a whole bunch of different people and not be mindful about who you're sharing your body with, the fact that you did that doesn't change just because it's more socially accepted for you to do it versus a woman. For those of you who are fixing your fingers to try to argue me on this point, let's step outside of sexual double standards for a moment. Let's talk about domestic violence. We know that in this society, it is unfortunately more acceptable for a woman to put her hands on a man than it is for a man to put his hands on a woman. Even though it's the same action, one is judged a lot more heavier than the other. Even though women might not have as many repercussions for putting their hands on a man, it still is wrong and it still shouldn't be done. Do you get my drift here? Example number 2. Let's step back into the idea of standards and what your preferences are in a partner. A lot of women nowadays want a man who is financially stable. A man who is making 6 figures is seen as being more valuable than a man who might be making, let's say, 40K a year. Something that I see all the time on the internet is men complaining about women having their preference. Specifically, men will say,
well, how are you going to sit here and request that a man make 6 figures? Are you making 6 figures?
Do you get my drift here? If you are a man who takes issue with the fact that women are asking for things of men that they're not doing themselves, just be mindful of the way that you're moving and the way that your peoples are moving if you guys expect a woman to conduct herself in a modest manner. Because not being a hypocrite is kind of the morally correct way to be. But here's the thing, Brittany Renner parallels a lot of the women that we were raised or influenced by. Well, I don't think they're ready for this one. She glorified this lifestyle on a very, very public platform for years. We're talking about a span of almost 10 years of her promoting using men for money, sleeping around with different people. She wrote a tell-all book talking about her sexual encounters. And even though she says it took a while for her to make a connection between her lack of self-worth and not valuing herself and the way that she moved sexually and allowed herself to be used by men, she still knew how she felt when all of this was happening. The sense of emptiness, feeling disgusted with yourself about the things that you allowed from men. And you still went out and promoted it to other women. What about the girls who may have been witnessing this as they were a teenager and they see, hey, this girl is getting attention from athletes, she's making all this money, she has this great lifestyle, she's popular, she's a beautiful girl. What happened to those girls? So instead of glorifying being promiscuous and sexually liberated and not being honest about the cons of that lifestyle, you probably should just keep that to yourself because it's the morally correct thing to do. You can lie to yourself, okay? Now, granted, I don't recommend that, but at the end of the day, if you lie to yourself, you're a detriment to yourself. When you lie to others though, problematic. So yes, while I am proud of her growth and I commend her for trying to be accountable and taking the time to reflect on traumas and insecurities that she has, I can't help but feel like Brittany Renner is the embodiment of when we're told how we should live our lives, only to be led astray and told correctly later on in life after the damage has already been done. And I'll switch over to talking about myself because I don't want to project my experiences onto other people. But this reminds me of the women in my life who told me that I should never depend on a man, be independent, focus on school only, relationships are a distraction, think about that later on in life, kids, love, marriage, all of that is later on in life. An afterthought, if you will, only to be interrogated now about when I'm gonna find someone and when I'm gonna start a family. A general problem is that we have women in our families, in our communities, on social media giving us really horrible advice that maybe works for some people in the lifestyle that they're okay with having, but honestly leads to a life filled with insecurity, regret, lack of self-worth. And instead of being honest about how their decisions have impacted their life so that they can steer younger women in the right direction before it's too late, women would rather rather give advice that leads to repeating cycles of trauma. Whew, it's getting hot in here. I feel like I'm preaching today. Well. But with all of that in mind, life has taught me that we deserve grace. We're human, and a lot of times we're gonna fall short. No one is perfect. I know that there are a lot of women who can relate to this feeling of regret because you did things that didn't really make a lot of sense when you were at a period of not loving yourself or recognizing the value that you brought into relationships. Trust me, I get it. So I really hope that Brittany finds peace, whether that's with someone or not. But another thing that life is teaching me is that sometimes no matter how much you've grown and how much accountability you can take for your past actions, there's always going to be a consequence. And that's what we need to be telling the younger generation. But those are my thoughts. Let me know what you're thinking in the comments, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.